Does that sound okay? Right. Hi, everyone. My name is Ramneet. I am a senior software engineer at Netflix. And today I'll be presenting my talk on cracking the growth code. Just give me a second and I'll just share my screen and we'll get started. All right. So, welcome to the United Hacks V4 workshop. And I'll be, as I mentioned, I'll be presenting my talk on cracking the growth code. A little bit about my experience so far. I have about more than a decade of experience working for tech companies such as eBay, Expedia, and very recently Netflix. I've been at Netflix for about 5 years, and I am into product engineering, more specifically growth engineering, which is what we will be talking about. So think of this as an introduction to the growth engineering discipline, where I'll be talking about, what do we do as part of growth engineering, and what can you expect, and what can you expect out of that stream if you were to take that as an career option. So let's get started. Now, what is growth engineering? So at a very high level, I think whenever you know people like us are starting our careers and we want to be developers or ICs, there are different streams that you can get into when you're joining tech companies. Some people are into infrastructure side, where they'll be working on more of very back end teams that are supporting platforms and infrastructures for systems overall. And then there are teams that are catering to product, and you're working on user facing features. So those are mostly product engineering teams. Even within product engineering, there's a discipline called growth engineering, which basically involves building and optimizing systems that help a company grow its user base, improve engagement, and drive revenue. Right. So all of these companies that are launching their products have a target revenue that they want to achieve and have a target plan. So this is the team that works with the product and the overall extended team to get those objectives, to meet those objectives, right? And what is unique about growth engineering is that it blends software engineering, it blends data analysis, software engineering, product management, and marketing all together to experiment and optimize and scale user acquisition, engagement, and retention. And growth engineers, as engineers, we are at a very high level, if I have to describe it, are tasked with, identifying areas of improvements, building features, and conducting experiments to enhance business metrics. Whatever business metrics could be important. If we're talking about a company like Netflix, it could be user signups. For a company that's e-commerce based, it could be, item purchases, conversions. Similarly, there'll be retentions and other revenue related metrics. So I mentioned that this is like an intersection of data, product, and engineering. So I value these as three main components of growth engineering. And to think about data, this is all about analyzing user behavior to identify if there are patterns. For instance, there'll be some users who sign up and then they, never return, or some users that end up becoming really engaged users. So this starts with analyzing user behavior, having the right metrics in place so that we can analyze user behavior and then come up with a hypothesis that for this section of users or for this cohort of users, we think we should, enhance the experience in this way so that the metric so that these metrics would be enhanced, and that would add on to our revenue. So data is a key part of growth engineering. Then, of course, comes product, which then analyzes that data and then decides, comes up with the hypothesis that I just mentioned. And those hypotheses could be supported by, underlying app features that we think would make the experience more user friendly, or the apps more stickier and more engaging, right? And as engineers, we would, implement features and build scalable systems to handle that at a particular scale, right? So all of these teams have to come together, as I mentioned, in growth engineering to deliver the outcome. So some real world examples that we sometimes work on, or you'll see it in other products when you use them, is, when you're signing up for Netflix or for any other product that matter for that matter, and you've given them their your email address, and sort of something happened and you fell off the flow and you did not complete it, you get a notification to, ask you to jump back in and, resume sign up. So that's something like growth engineering that's at work, that wants people to come back to the sign up funnel, or to come back to the business funnel that the product has. And if I have to translate that real world example into some technical example, would be, we would be working on some A/B test. Um, and I'll cover A/B testing a little bit later, but think of it as an experimentation that we do in tech, where we are going to experiment a particular feature in checkout flow or in any other flow to see whether one version leads to more purchases or conversion than the other. So all of these are examples of what we do as part of growth engineering. But before we get into the nitty gritties of it, there are four high level, domains that are there in growth engineering. The first is user acquisition. So user acquisition is all about acquiring new users, that is bringing users to the product. So every company would have like a conversion funnel or a sign up funnel, and top of the funnel is where you want to capture as many users as possible, right? And that funnel, then, people start dropping off, and people who finally sign up or who finally buy a product are the people who actually get converted. So acquisition, if you're talking about acquisition, that will be the team which will be responsible for expanding the top of the funnel, get as many users as you want into this experience. And so these teams would be dealing with a few key metrics, and the metrics that I have in front, this is not the exhaustive list, but there are definitely more metrics. But at a very high level, you will be talking about what is the conversion rate, how many users landed on that experience and they interacted and they ended up, converting. By converting, I mean whatever is your business outcome. right? And if it's like a multi-step experience, then the users, as I mentioned, sometimes drop off, sometimes get distracted, and they get out of the flow. So what are the areas where the maximum drop off is happening? So all of these metrics become very important for you to understand how your product is working on the domain of user acquisition. Then, companies spend a lot of money in marketing to sort of acquire more users. And that is when you also have to keep track of a metric called customer acquisition cost. Like, what's the cost of acquiring new customers through different channels? And click through rate is also the percentage of users who click on a marketing campaign. So this is one of the channels where you would have invested, and how many users are actually coming through that channel for you to sort of figure out if the investment is worth the returns that we are getting. So these terms sound a lot as if they're in the product domain and less in the engineering domain, but that's the unique part about growth engineering, where as an engineer you also have to wear the hat of a product manager or a product person who completely understands these metrics and is a thought partner to the product. To you would have your own opinion, your own suggestions on how to tweak those metrics or what hypothesis to test. So that is why we say this is or this stream or this discipline operates at a trifecta of data, engineering, and product. If you're in the infrastructure teams, if you're in teams which are developing back-end platforms, you are a little bit isolated from the product and the business metrics. You'll have your own engineering metrics, but product and business metrics would be a little bit far from your work. But this is one area where you'll be brainstorming product decisions with the key stakeholders. So second is engagement. Now we've acquired users. Now our job is to keep them engaged so that they stay on our platform. They keep using our product. So it's obviously about keeping the users actively engaged with our product over time. And this could be through in-app features that you develop, or marketing, or push notifications, personalized experience like we do at Netflix. And the key is to, and how do you measure the engagement? Of course, it depends on the domain that you're operating in, but certain very generic metrics are like daily active users, like number of users who are interacting with the product daily, monthly active users, that is number of users interacting with product monthly. What is the engagement rate? How many users, percentage of active users relative to the total user base, and what's their session length? So if it's a streaming product, then we also talk about it's similar to the engagement rate. How many users are coming back to stream every day or every few days in a week, and that determines how sticky our content is for the users. So that depends on the domain, but overall the engagement metrics, very generic metrics, could be daily active users and monthly active users, and then depending on what your domain is, you define how you're going to measure the stickiness of your app or your product. So after engagement, even you've done your best to acquire users, you've done your best to engage with users, there'll still be a churn. And by churn we mean there'll be people who'll cancel, who'll not use your product anymore. And then that's where retention comes in, because retention is important, because you want to retain users over time and prevent churn means getting users out of your platform. So there is a voluntary churn that people do not find value. So how do you convince those users that there is value? And if by to give you an example, if somebody was to cancel a subscription, a lot of products have features where you ask them that, okay, there's a 7-day trial to downgrade your plan. Do you want to downgrade your plan? And because if it's due to monetary reasons that you don't want to continue your subscription, there are other alternatives. So these are some of the measures that people use in the retention domain to make sure that there's no the churn is within a limit. We can't officially have zero churn. That would be that won't be possible. I mean, as much as we would like to, but that won't be possible. So there are ways to control that churn. So for that, you first have to understand what's going on in your system, which is where the metrics help, right? So we have churn rate, that is the percentage of users who are actually stop using the product, retention rate, who continue to use the product, and the customer lifetime value, which is the total revenue that's expected from a user over the entire relationship with the product. So all of these metrics help us understand where our systems and our business is going, and what do we need to change. So once we have identified these metrics at a very high level, what data science helps us with is to identify various cohorts of users who are depicting a common behavior, right? Cohort is a group that's depicting one sort of behavior, and then that is those are the cohorts that we take into our discussion, and then develop a hypothesis and create tests. So, in addition to what we have spoken about, acquisition, retention, engagement, there's monetization. So there are a lot of platforms where sometimes you start off as a free user, right? And then there are subscriptions, there are one-time purchases. So these are all ways of monetizing your engagement with the product, right? And ultimately, businesses care about ARP, which is average revenue per user, right? And revenue per user segment, that is various user segments, whether it's free. Of course, if it's a free user, there's still some monetization happening either through ads or any other way, whichever way, unless it's a completely noble cause platform, which I assume we're not talking about in this case. But for products that typically offer even free membership, there has to be some sort of a monetization plan that they have by sort of nudging you to go to a higher tier paid plan. So all of these sort of initiatives where we are trying to upsell you or nudge you to subscribe or purchase some feature, that all falls into monetization. So, as I said, average revenue per user is important. Conversion rate from free to paid is important, and overall, expansion revenue, that the revenue gained from existing customers through upgrades or add-ons or increased usage is important. So, whenever we are talking about growth engineering, the engineering division would largely be basically split into these domains where users would be working with their product counterparts and their data science counterparts to to discuss features and experiments that they can run for each of these domains. So all of these four domains are really important because they target users at different points in the funnel, right? And we have to optimize the entire funnel. We can't just optimize the top of the funnel. Say we acquire like a huge number of users, but then if we don't pay attention to engagement, and if we don't pay attention to retention, then that gain is going to fall off eventually. So in order to maintain that gain from the added users, we have to pay attention to all these four domains to make sure we meet our goals and objectives. So, what does a growth engineer typically do? Right. So the first thing that's primary, that's sort of a bread and butter of a growth engineer is A/B testing and tracking and metric setup. So I'm not sure how many of us are aware of A/B testing, but I do have a slide to cover what experimentation and A/B testing is. But basically, it's A/B testing and testing various features, layouts, messaging, and different versions of your product to determine what drives a better outcome. And that outcome is always defined at the very beginning of starting that A/B test, right? So we'll talk about A/B testing in detail, but think of it as experimenting different versions of what you're building, right? Then there is a tracking and metric setup. Now, you can't experiment unless you know what metrics you want to see improving and what metrics you absolutely don't want to see deteriorating, right? So it is very important that you have observability, very important that you are logging all these metrics, and you know what those metrics and what are their intended directions that they should go to. right? So and this is, as I said, this is the primary work that is there. Of course, then there is feature development, right? We are adding new features, we're deploying features aimed at improving user journey, and this could be referrals, onboarding flows, in-app notifications. And while we are deploying those features, as an engineer, we're also responsible for optimizing for the speed and scale of that. So there, at some scale, and as growth engineer, you will see your product go through a certain life cycle where, if you're working in those initial stage startups, there'll be very few users, to suddenly you'll scale to hundreds and thousands, and then 100K and million users, hopefully. So you'll see that life cycle for your product. And initially, when we are building such products, scale may not be the topmost concern, but getting something out in the market would be the most concern. But as you optimize, as you start scaling in terms of the user base, then optimization for scale and speed becomes very important, because once you have got the product market fit, and then it is very important to scale. And suddenly you'll find yourselves shifting gears from identifying the right market fit to now thinking about scale, and then figuring out, what is the page load time, what are the response times, and how can I improve, how can I improve, because even a slight delay during the sign up, or during while we are buying items today, this would be from personal experience too. Even a slight delay and you're distracted, and that moment of truth where you could actually purchase something or sign up has gone, right? So this is it's very important at some point to also think about speed and scale. These are some of the roles where, collaboration. So if you find yourself in this kind of a team, it's a very cross-functional role. You would not be working in silos. You would not be working in isolated team of engineers only. You will be working very cross-functionally with product managers, with designers, with marketing teams, with researchers, to align, and you have to align all of them and tell them what is possible and what is not. So that basically means the entire cross-functional team has to come together, and you have to be really good at communicating, understanding their language, understanding metrics, overall company goals and objectives, and then translating it to engineering and technical solutions. So feedback loop is pretty important, because you have to collect feedback. Once your product is shipped, you would also collect feedback from your customer sales engagement teams, to then take it back and see, and work with product to then realign on strategies and features. Other than that, there are growth hacking and iterative improvements. So you'll find, basically, I think an engineer would also be open to looking for creative, non-traditional ways to boost user acquisition. It's mostly, it's sort of a, like we are in a hackathon right now. I feel growth engineer, depending on what kind of company you're working on, more often than not, it's also a growth hack, always, for you to be in that hack mode, that how do you get to that level, how do you get the next boost in user acquisition. And it could be non-traditional ways. I think this part of the org would be more startup-y, if I can say, and more open to hacks and unique ideas than any other org, because this is where the most monetization comes from. Of course, the product has to be great for the users to enjoy, but this team is responsible for getting those users to the forefront, and getting that monetization from them. So in addition to the unique growth hacks that are sort of spurts that you try to identify, there are always continuous iteration. We're always looking for incremental improvements too. So you'll make big bets, and then you'll also look at continue to iteratively improve the experience based on, again, the metrics. So this is all a metrics based approach, where you say we're ready to take big bets, but we are also want to not slow down on making iterative improvements. And the last part is about monitoring and reporting results. So it is analyzing experiment results. So when we run those experiments, they run for about, depending on the traffic, they could be from anywhere from weeks to months that we run those experiments. And once the results are available, we'll have to analyze the experiment results. And usually this is more of a data analyst and data scientist domain, where they are analyzing test results. And as engineers, we are partners in that approach with them, because we need to partner with them to understand why, and why are the results the way they are, and what do they mean, right? And do we have the engineering metrics to sort of aligned with what data science is looking at? So analyzing is not just one team's responsibility. Yes, it's primarily data scientists who would present their analysis, but engineering counterparts would have to align with their approach, and also look at the engineering observability data to see if that makes sense, and whether they corroborate both data scientists and engineering results. And then reporting. So this involves basically communicating the outcomes of the experiments and projects to stakeholders, ensuring that learnings are shared across the system. All right. Now, I wanted to speak a little bit about A/B testing, since this is a very important part of what we do in growth engineering. And I'm also happy to take questions towards the end, if that's possible, if we have the time. But just to cover a little bit about A/B testing, and it's basically an experimental method that is used to compare two versions, as I said, two versions of a product or a feature or experience, to see what performs better. So basically, a lot of companies already have this, are already testing this, or using this, especially for their user facing features, where, let's say, there are two variants, version A, and version A, which is currently active in production, is always called the control version. So this is our control cell. And the version B that we are testing, which is the hypothesis that we are testing, is the test cell. So all the traffic that's coming into that feature or that product is divided into a control cell and a test cell. Right. So every user request that comes in could either be part of the control cell or the test cell. And that is the reason they would see just one of the two experiences. And what happens is that as the user interacts with the product or the feature, we'll always have this data or this metric with us, that what cell does the user belong to. And once they are done sign up, or once they're done with the sign up or purchase, we will be able to track all their of course we have logs to say which user actually signed up and not. And once we've run that experiment for a couple of weeks or a month also, sometimes we'll know how many users converted in the control cell versus the test cell. And we're not just going to look at conversions, as I said, depending on the feature that you're testing for. It could be different metrics. So whenever a hypothesis is presented that I think this is the problem we are seeing, let's say, for instance, we are seeing high cancellations, right? So let's come up with this feature, which where we send them an email to remind them of that they have signed up, and these are the perks that they are getting, versus sending them this plain email where we just don't mention a lot of you know uh, value levers, we don't mention. So let's compare these two experiences. And then you will define what metrics are important to you. So for something like what I just described, the click through rates or the open email rates would tell us whether the email is engaging enough for the user, and then subsequently that should result in lower cancellation rates. So you define your primary metric, you define what is the secondary metric, you define metrics that are absolutely that should absolutely not be in the red. That means those metrics should not go down when you compare it to the control cell. And some metrics could be neutral, right? So these are some of the so product comes up with a hypothesis, and data scientists define what metrics are important and what metrics would mean what, how many days would we want to run the experiment. And engineering is part of all of this because we need to understand what we are trying to test and also give our inputs as to how we want to test this, because sometimes engineering scope or estimate can change the way we want to test it, which I'll come to a little bit later. But think of engineers as being thought partners to both product and data scientists to understand what is the objective and how we are trying to achieve it. And if possible, we can always give feedback if we want to tweak the way we are testing this. All right. So, how to excel as a growth engineer? As I mentioned, it's a little bit different from the typical product engineer. Going back to our discussion around how there is an infra engineer and a product engineer at a very high level, and within product too, there could be a growth engineer is a little bit different because you'll find yourself that you'll have to operate with excellence in the trifecta of data engineering and product, and at any given time you'll be wearing multiple hats of that of an engineer or a product manager or a data scientist. Not saying that you'll have to do everything on your own, but you'll have to be thought partners, which is why this role becomes a little bit unique and important. All right. So what would it actually take? So I think excelling in growth engineering would require you to basically excel across three axes. In fact, there's a fourth one which I'll mention later, but three primary axes. One is, as I mentioned, product. Now, what does it mean to excel on product axis? So it's I would actually reorder what I've added in the list, but how when you're working as part of a team, you're more focused on the team objectives, what you're trying to do. But I think you should take a step back always and think about what are the company's objectives. Then how does it translate into the objectives of your specific org? What are some of the metrics that we are trying to improve, and what are some of the business areas that are important? Right? So understanding company objectives and priorities are very important. That gives you that product and business acumen that is the secret sauce in interpreting experimental data and interpreting understanding hypothesis. So you start there, and then for your own specific domain, let's say if I'm working on the acquisition domain, I should be very well versed with what are the metrics that are important in acquisition, not just in general, but when acquisition for my specific product or feature, right? So understanding your core domain, whether that's acquisition, retention, and what are the key metrics that are important, and understanding the impact and the urgency. So urgency bit basically is a tie is when you tie company objectives and priorities with the metrics in your core domain. Now, when there might be some metrics that are really not that urgent, are really not that important because they're not part of company priority, but there'll be some metrics that would directly map into that company priority of, let's say, acquiring more users, right? So conversion rate, acquisition rate is higher. So that those are the kind of initiatives that are really important, and that's where you should spend most of your energy, whether you are hacking or thinking about ways to boost up acquisition or ways to control or add retention. So understanding impact and urgency is important. So this is all about wearing the product hat all the time and not just saying that you give me a product spec and I'll work on implementing the features. So this is a little different approach where you are also wearing that product hat. Then second is data access. By data access, I mean um, for like I described metrics for every domain. When you're part of a particular domain or a team, you have to understand what are the key metrics. You have to whenever a hypothesis is presented to you, you think about what metrics it is meant to move and what metrics it is not meant to touch or change at all. So that gives you an edge over any other typical engineer, because now you know what data is important, and then you can use that information to then design the logging and tracking capabilities, because at the end of it, you're the engineer, you're not just going to implement the feature, you're also going to add observability. You're also going to make sure there are metrics and tracking and logging available. Now, unless you know what are the metrics that are important, you won't be able to log and track them. So understanding the metrics and then making sure that you design the logging and tracking capabilities, not just for the operational readiness, like not just for you to know, and your and not just for you and your engineering team to know whether the systems are in good health, but also for experimentation tracking. So this becomes really important when we talk about data access. And then there is engineering access. Of course, we have to build scalable and flexible systems, and we have to keep trade-offs in mind while designing systems. And more so, you'll hear this typically in pretty much every engineering best practices that we talk about. But this becomes the flexible systems part becomes really important in growth engineering, because what happens is typically any code that you're writing, there is a good 90% chance that that code would continue to exist as a product engineer. But as a growth engineer, when you're writing code, there is a very good chance that the test might fail, and you'll have to sort of rip out all the code and then go back to testing. So it requires a very different mindset to build systems that are more flexible, and to be able to maintain systems that are constantly in a state of change. Right, there is nothing, whatever is being added, there's a high chance that a few weeks or months later we'll see the experiment didn't work, or maybe it worked, so you productize the experience, but if it didn't, you have to rip out the code. So flexible systems are key, and you being aware of those possibilities while designing systems is also, it makes you empowered to make the right trade-offs. And I'll give you an example about that a little in a while. um, as I said, you have to be a thought partner to the product, and that's not just about you having your own opinion on the product. Sometimes it is also to help product understand where to cut down on the complexity, on the features with low value, in the interest of faster execution. Product would always want to learn fast, because they a lot of times the experiments are like dipping your toe in water and finding out whether this thing runs or not. And for and if the product is sometimes trying to come up with a collection of features, and with some of those are adding unnecessary complexity and adding too much scope, be a thought partner to say that this is the feature that's adding a lot of engineering complexity, not just during the development time but also for maintenance. Is this a high value feature? Be empowered to have those discussions with product, because that's when product truly values the engineering input. Right, and sometimes you'll be surprised that sometimes product would say, yeah, really, we didn't care about, we didn't know it was a high cost feature, so but we don't really care about it, but how can we just remove it to get to to remove scope. And yeah, so unless you have that sort of a relationship with product where you are an equal partner, this kind of discussions won't happen, which is very important, because here the time to market is really important. The sooner you test a hypothesis, the sooner you will get the results, the sooner you will be able to take an action. Right, so on the engineering part, apart from designing flexible systems, apart from being okay letting go of some of your code because the test didn't work, and that will happen, apart from being a thought partner to the product, there is also this whole concept of on calls, right? Observability. And here, we're not just being on call or monitoring or observing our systems for degradation in health, but we also think of on calls very differently. So uh, today, if some there was going to be a system health issue, of course people would get paged. But if there is a drop in signups, if there's a drop in users selecting a plan, or a user adding item to the cart, there would also be pages, right, to those teams. So it's not just system health, it's also the business health that is important. So when you're developing such systems, you'll have to make sure that you're adding observability, not just for system metrics but also for business metrics. And this is the last is the fourth axis, which was totally added later, but I just wanted to sort of stress the importance of cross-functional work here. I know there are some engineers who would be really happy working in silos, working on their own systems, but this is one role that requires extensive cross-functional collaboration. So if you really enjoy working with people from different disciplines, and it could be design, it could be research, it could be product, data scientists, that this would give you that opportunity. And if not, then yeah, this probably is not a best fit. But this is one of the roles which demands uh, extensive cross-functional collaboration. All right. So in the end, I just want to highlight that this is one of the many paths you can take to as you begin your career, or for those of you who are looking to pursue a career in tech and then look at it. But again, a good choice if you enjoy the trifecta of product, data, engineering, right? um, I see some questions in the chat. Are we okay to A lot of this is about keeping gaining. What small tips do you have for now that can help improve in first gaining the members, marketing? So I think it depends. What tips I have for gaining the users, I think it depends on two things. One is what is your domain, and what is the budget that you want to spend on those marketing channels, right? So we at Netflix have that brand name where we have to just all we have to do is maybe have some new experience on welcome screens and maybe invest in some marketing campaigns, so budget doesn't come up that often. But when you're starting up, I think that is very important to know what channels are available and what is the return on investment on each channel, right? To see which channel should you spend the money on, and what channel gives you the highest conversion, right? What is the most popular channel? Could be social media, could be different channels within social media. So knowing what works and knowing your target audience is very important. I'll go on to the next question, which is what softwares do you recommend to track daily, monthly users, retention, and more? Now, typically, I think there are already softwares that are available in the market that do this experimentation setup for you. But I think when you are at a stage where for these, at a decent size company, they would prefer to have their data in house and have those metrics. So as long as logging and everything is there, after that it becomes a data analytics issue to run those queries on your backend systems and get the data. But if you're starting small, I won't have the names with me, but you can do a quick search, and there are definitely systems that do that A/B testing, that give you that A/B testing platform. But if not, if those are medium or big size companies, I think all of that is in house today, where you do the tracking and logging, and then people and the data engineering team can help run queries on it to get all of these rates and metrics. How does one transition from being a software engineer or a data engineer to a growth engineer? If you're already a software engineer, I think it's just a matter of getting to the right teams, getting to growth engineering, and showing that passion for product. I don't think there is any there is any specific technical skill set that would be required in addition to what you already do as a software engineer. But we most definitely we want to see a passion for product, right? And it is okay if you're not excited about user facing features, you're more excited about infra. But people who are love working on user facing features and want to see the whole life cycle of the product, I've seen are generally very successful in these sort of teams, and they love working cross functionally. So to answer your question, it's not a particular tech skill set that you need to have. If you're already a software engineer, you're already building features, front end, back end, full stack, being full stack is definitely an edge. I am a back end engineer, and I'm doing okay. I'd like to believe, right? I'm doing great in that team. So I won't say only full stack, but full stack definitely gives you an edge in smaller setups too, because then you're like, you're handling the entire life cycle on your own. So I think having that product acumen and that willingness to learn definitely would be helpful, and just reach out to the teams that you see are in growth engineering, and just say that I want to learn, and I'm really interested in the product. Show willingness to learn and show a little bit of awareness. I think that should be the first step to take. Any other questions? If not, then I think, yeah, we can end the session. Thank you everyone for having me. I have left my LinkedIn link here, profile link here. I'll also share this presentation so that this can be circulated. But thank you so much for your time, and feel free to connect with me for further discussion. Thank you. Bye.